Hello, my name is Chelsea Tetlow. My student number is 33184128. This is my EDN462 Assignment 3 audiovisual presentation. This audiovisual presentation, or my Assignment 3, is a planning, implementing, and evaluating and reflecting of free learning experiences conducted with a child from my Assignment 2. Information on the focus child. To protect the identity of the focus child, she will be referred to as Claire. Claire is 5 years and 2 months old. She is in pre-primary. The focus of mathematics. The mathematical focus from my previous assignment was measurement. I decided to choose measurement as the Australian curriculum for pre-primary/foundation year states. Use direct and indirect comparisons to decide which is longer, heavier, and holds more, and explain reasoning in everyday language. My previous assignment consisted of free learning experiences that related to the curriculum standard above. The learning experiences were adapted versions of the first steps diagnostic tasks. Learning experience. Building blocks. At the beginning of the provocation, I started asking Claire to help me build a train. Claire had another idea of what we would be building. She said we were going to build a princess castle. Instead of doing my original train idea and comparing our trains of lengths, widths, and shapes, we created 2 different princess castles. As you can see below, there is 3 images of Claire creating the castles. As we built our castles, I asked Claire about the sizes of the blocks she was using. She described to me which blocks were taller, fatter, small, and big. As we created our castles, Claire would ask questions about how many bedrooms, toilets, and car parks my castle had. After discussing the amount of rooms we both had, I asked Claire who had more bedrooms, to see if she understands more or less. Claire stated, I have more rooms. I asked Claire, why? Claire said, because you only have 7 bedrooms, and I have 30. Claire was able to successfully demonstrate that she understood the concept of more or less. After creating our castles, I asked Claire which tower was bigger to see what form of measurement she described. Claire made some key observations as she stated, your castle is taller than mine, but mine is fatter. After we built our castles, we played with some princesses. Claire decided to wage war on my castle and destroyed it. After destroying my castle, she knocked hers down and stated, I'm going to build the biggest castle. It will be taller and fatter than yours. We then built some more castles competing with each other to see who had the tallest and widest castle. The learning process. The learning experience was conducted in Claire's living room. I followed Claire's lead with what she wanted to create with the blocks. We created our own castles and competed at who created the biggest castle. I provoked particular mathematical learning through the use of questions regarding measurement to get Claire thinking of different mathematical concepts regarding what we were doing. We spoke about size and shapes of blocks as we built. We spoke about the concept of more or less, and described our castles using measurement language. My second learning experience was making necklaces. Claire was excited to see all different types of beads. What are these for? Claire asked. I explained to Claire that we were going to be making some jewelry. Claire was instantly excited as it was Mother's Day that following weekend. Claire expressed, I can make some for Mummy, some for Nanny, and some for me, and maybe some for Adam. I asked Claire, what type of jewelry do you want to make? Can we make a bracelet or necklace? Claire responded, I want to make a necklace for Mummy, and a necklace for Nanny, and a necklace for me. I asked Claire, how long do we need to make the necklace for Mummy, Nanny, and you? Claire responded, well, Nanny will need the biggest because she's old, and I will need a small one because I'm little, and Mum will need a big one because she's old, but not as old as Nan. I asked Claire, why does Nan need the biggest because she's the oldest? Claire explained, Adam is my big brother, and he is bigger than me, and Mum is bigger than Adam, so Nan is more old than Mum, so she is bigger than Mum. I found this concept very interesting, and I thought that it would be very good to look more into this concept to further Claire's development. As we cut the strings, I asked Claire if she could compare the string sizes to one another to make sure they were the right size for her family. Claire lined the strings up next to one another and would state that one needs to be bigger or smaller. After cutting the string, we checked to see if they would be appropriate size against Claire and myself. After cutting the string, we moved on to threading the beads. As we created our necklaces, I asked Claire questions regarding the beads. Wow, these beads are all different shapes and sizes. Can you show me the longest bead? Claire stopped what she was doing and lined the beads up. As she examined the length of the beads, she asked, "Do you mean this way or this way?" while moving her hands horizontally and vertically. I stated, "I mean vertically." "This means straight up, like how tall it is." Claire then tried to stand all the beads up to see the height difference. After experimenting with the beads, she pointed to the first one and said, "This is the tallest." I continued to ask Claire which beads were taller or shorter, comparing them to each other. As you can see on the top left, this is Claire's lining up of the beads. She had the tallest bead above them all and pointed to this one and compared them. After we created our necklaces, I asked Claire if the necklaces were still big and small after putting the beads on. I created my necklaces the same size as her mother's to propose her some measurement questions. Claire checked to make sure all the necklaces were still the right size. I said, "Wow, mine and your mom's are still the same size, but it looks like mine has more beads on it. Does it? Can you count them to make sure?" Claire counted the beads and says, "Yes, yours has more." I asked, "But how does mine have more if they're the same size?" Claire said, "Well, maybe you have more beads because you use little beads and I had big beads." I congratulated Claire on her observations. The learning process. This activity was conducted within Claire's living room. Um, we played and we played creating the necklaces, but when proposing questions, Claire explored her mathematical understanding through experimentation. How I provoked particular mathematical learning. I focused on child-centered questions that would provoke Claire to use direct comparisons to describe and explore mathematical concepts of measurements. I also asked her questions to expand her understanding of mathematical concepts. My final learning experience was playing with scales. At the beginning of the learning experience, myself and Claire sat outside her garden with a pair of scales. Claire was very interested in balancing scales as she had only ever seen common household scales. Claire asked, "What are they? What do they do?" I told Claire, "I'm not sure. Maybe we should play around with them to see what they do." Claire was intrigued. She began pushing down on the side of the scales, which then raised the other side. She pushed down on both sides and seen that she was able to even the scales. I suggested, "Maybe we can place something in them." Claire then started walking around her garden to collect some materials to place in the scales. She started by placing some small twigs in one side of the container. She stated, "The scales aren't moving. Maybe I need something bigger." Claire gathered some rocks and placed them within the opposite side of the container. She excitedly examined and expressed, "Those rocks made it move. Look at that. It's all the way down here." I asked Claire, "Why do you think the rocks made the scales move so much, but the twigs did nothing?" Claire picked up one rock and one twig and examined them. She stated, "Maybe it's because the rock is like a circle and the stick is skinny." She continued to examine the materials. "Oh, maybe it's because the rock is heavy and the stick is skinny." As you can see to the left side, there's Claire playing with the scales. She got quite excited and she gathered a lot of rocks in her garden in the bottom left corner. And she piled the rocks up and made sure that they were even. At the top of the corner, that was Claire comparing rocks and sticks together. She really enjoyed this activity and experimented quite a lot with different materials. I expressed to Claire that her observations were correct, and I asked, "How could we make the scale go back to the middle?" Claire said, "I think we need the same things in each side." I asked Claire to explain what she meant. She explained, "Well, we need one rock in here and another rock in here." Claire then gathered two different rocks of different sizes and placed them within the scales and said, "They are the same, but this one is going more down. Why is it not in the middle?" I explained to Claire, "I think that the rocks are two different weights. One rock might be heavier." Claire sat back and thought. She expressed, "Maybe they don't need to be the same, but they need to be the same heavy." Claire then tested her theory by placing rocks in both sides until the scale reached the middle. I asked Claire, "Could we have some rocks in one side and something else on the other side to weigh the same?" Claire experimented with different materials in her garden, making the scales reach the middle. I asked Claire, "Why does the scale go to the middle if we have one rock and 10 twigs?" Claire explained, because those 10 twigs are the same as the one rock. As Claire was heavily engaged within the provocation, I allowed her time to play and experiment with the scouts for as long as she wanted. When she started disengaging with comparing weights of two objects, I asked if she could order which materials were heaviest to lightest. Claire done some hefting to all the materials. She then placed the materials in either a heavy pile or a light pile. I asked Claire which one is the heaviest. She pointed to the heavy pile and I asked, but which is the heaviest one out of them? Claire then done hefting again to all the objects in the heavy pile and placed the heaviest item to one side and the others were placed on the light objects. I then asked Claire if she was able to order the rocks from heaviest to see if it was comprehension at comprehending the question that I was asking, um, and to see if she was able to order the rocks in a start, middle, and end process. Claire gathered her materials again and began hefting. This time I removed all other objects. I just used rocks in case Claire was confusing the objects' heaviness in comparison to height. She hefted the rocks and she was able to line the rocks from beginning, like from the largest to the smallest, based on the heaviest to lightest weight. As you can see the top left corner, Claire was hefting the rocks between her, and on the bottom she began ordering them. She had hefted the smallest rocks and was ordering them, and she found it quite interesting as she wasn't comparing the rocks size-wise as I assumed she would, but she was actually using hefting process and placing the rocks in a largest to smallest weight scaling. The learning process. This was conducted in Claire's garden. This lesson was very child-focused and child-led. Claire experimented with materials, and I proposed questions to help her develop mathematical understanding of what was happening. I provoked particular mathematical learning once again through questions. These questions led Claire into experimenting with the materials and making her own meaning. The questions regarding what is a scale, what is it used for, direct and indirect comparisons to materials. What now? At times, Claire would use incorrect mathematical terminology. She would refer to something that is long to be tall or fatter, which is two different factors of measurement. Expanding and explaining to Claire the idea of vertical and horizontal is tall and fatter, and allowing her to see and experiment with this concept will further her mathematical concepts. Claire's ideology of age affects height/size was very interesting, and I think furthering this ideology will be beneficial to Claire's learning and development. This should be explored through stages of development such as understanding in certain ages/stages. Some people are going to be taller or shorter, but this does not mean that someone the same age as Claire will be the same height due to genetic factors. What did I learn? After completing this assignment, I was able to see the importance of play-based learning, as Claire would stay in her zone of proximal development to create her own learning while engaging with the activity in her own enjoyable manner. I found that the more she enjoyed the activity, the longer she would stay engaged, which was very eye-opening, and it made the experience more meaningful for Claire, and therefore she was able to learn more at her own level. What would I do differently in the future? When I first began the learning experiences, I had a very structured idea of what we needed to do. While playing with Claire, she went off and created her own learning within the provocations. At first, I tried to redirect Claire back to my main lesson idea, but she would constantly become disengaged. After a while of trying to redirect Claire, I decided to follow Claire's own learning, which is something I should have done to begin with. This reflects within my learning experiences I recluded, as the first one began at the start of when I started working with Claire, and I think that was my first learning experience that I actually followed Claire and allowed her to do what she wanted. And then by the end, it was purely child-based, child-focused, and child-led. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.